What is your real name?
Kristen.
Kristen.
So I was born with the name Kristen, and through this process, there's been a name change to Veda, and there's a whole story in that too. So
is that like a public story or not a public story?
Oh, it's fine to public story it.
Okay, sure.
Okay. Really, so Kristen, was born with the name Kristen. I picked the name Veda Revival for my business. Like 5 years ago.
What is Veda? Like, what is...
So Veda means ancient knowledge, and revival is obviously bringing it back. So that's really my whole foundation, and everything I stand for is really like, what did our pristine ancestors live like? And when I say pristine ancestors, it's like, I don't believe in this whole story of we were cavemen and we're the enlightened version. You know what I mean? We used to be connected to God, connected to nature, those pristine ancestors. So that's kind of my baseline, is like, how did they live?
Mm-hmm.
They were connected. And so that's kind of the knowledge I want to bring back. So that's the reason I picked the whole business name. I actually ended up doing a past life regression. Do you know much about Dolores Cannon and her work?
There's one of her books is right behind you right there.
Oh my gosh. Awesome.
Yeah.
So she does her...
I've not read it, but it's on my I have read most of these, to be clear, but that's one I've not
love
read,
her
admittedly.
work. She's amazing. She does this QHHT, which is this past life regression stuff. And my mom was training to learn how to do her stuff, and she needed people to practice on. So I did a past life thing with her. Actually lived a lifetime where I was Veda. And I married my husband, Cam, in another lifetime. And I got to experience this life where we started the Ray family. So it was kind of this whole realization of, yes, Veda Revival is my brand name, but also it was like a revival of me in a lot of different ways. So anyway, Veda has this essence that I've taken on as I've come along the journey. So yeah, that's kind of the story of Veda.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I hit you up on Instagram after seeing you share a variety of posts related to the birth certificate, social security number, and other things related to our relationship with government, but coming from the lens of how to approach that as parents with your respective children. Yeah. And I've done quite a few deep dives. I've immersed myself in this whole common law, equity, commerce sort of law space and the cross-section between all of those things, and hadn't spoken with someone on how to approach the whole birth certificate and social security number conversation. So that's the sort of frame for why you're sitting with me for those who are listening or watching.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I had you do is I interviewed Emily Saldea from Free Birth Society, and that was an awesome conversation. But what we're going to do with this conversation as well is sort of extend that conversation, go beyond some of the things that we didn't cover or maybe only touched on, because I think we mentioned circumcision, for example, but we didn't really dive deep into circumcision, if my memory serves me correctly.
Yeah.
So let's just start with this, since it's going to be framed around birth. Where did you get your start? I feel like that's a weird question to ask because I just met your kids and your husband. Obviously, it was probably giving birth, but like, what tipped you off to this sort of alternative approach to birth in general?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. My whole journey began with birth was when I got pregnant. I knew nothing about birth. I didn't know anything. I had watched The Business of Being Born, and I don't know if you've seen that documentary.
I'm not. I've had a lot of people recommend it to me, but I think I've had so many conversations at this point that I don't even know if it's necessary for me. Yeah, but it'd still be good to probably learn some stats and stuff like this.
Yeah, no, it's very tip of the iceberg. If you don't know anything about birth, it really does open your eyes to the idea that birth is a business. Mm. So that's kind of the only thing that I had seen. So actually, when I started my birth journey with my baby, because I'd actually, even going back to that, like prior, I'd been told I could never have kids, because I was told I had a brain tumor and all this stuff. Like it's a whole medical, my real journey starts with a medical crisis,
so
essentially.
Were you already sort of on an alternative natural health approach to health at this point?
As far as medical stuff. So that's really kind of what woke me up to, okay, maybe things aren't what they seem to be, you know? So kind of blew the lid on the medical industry. Then I got pregnant and I knew nothing about birth. I didn't even have friends that had home births or, just kind of knew one track. So I actually started with a midwife in the hospital. for my first like 2 appointments. And I just felt sick to my stomach. And I remember talking to my husband and I was like, I just feel so deeply if I keep going this route, I'm going to really disappoint myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm at a point in my life where I can't disappoint myself anymore, especially now that I have someone else that's dependent on me.
Yeah.
So that's really what started my journey, or my ritual, I want to say, is asking my baby to guide me. So that became a daily thing. Every single day I got in the shower, I connected with my baby, and I just said, all I know is what I don't want. I don't know what I do want. I don't know what that path looks like, but please guide me. So I would put that down and just put that out there every day. And I kid you not, the things that...
You're talking about like while you were pregnant, right?
While I was pregnant, yep. Yeah. So the things that would show up on my Instagram feed, or the people that I would meet, or the conversations, like I knew I was being guided. So that's kind of when I was guided to the truth about birth and really everything, the ultrasounds, the tests, you name it, the medical, even the midwives, you know. So that's really what began my journey first and foremost. So I learned basically... I think the biggest thing that I even learned through that pregnancy that my first baby guided me to was this whole idea of imprints and how our generations, really the way we were born affects the way we give birth to our babies, and how that whole cascade goes.
Did you do anything to sort of approach resolving your own birth trauma for your birth into this world?
Yes. Okay. What was really interesting is my baby guided me to this whole ancestral part. And he started telling me to start tuning into the way I was born, and the way my mom was born, the way my grandma was born, and start kind of diving into those stories. So what I started doing is I wrote down what I thought my birth was like. So I it was kind of funny to think, hey, I'm pregnant and I don't even know my own birth story. So before I even asked my mom about my birth story, I kind of just really tuned into my body and asked my body, what did it feel like? And it was pretty traumatic, actually. This feeling of coming out, being touched by a stranger, being in a room that wasn't welcoming,
sterile,
being ripped
white
away from my mom, like all these things. It was actually pretty traumatic. So after that, I called my mom and I was like, hey, will you tell me about my birth story? And she told me this it was just beautiful. It was a hospital birth, but she's like, it was great. You came out. They placed you on my chest. It was great. So I thought that was kind of weird. I was like, that's not how I felt, but I understand people have different lenses from the same experience, right. But I kind of put that down, and 2 weeks later she called me and she was like, I just read my journal from a few days after you were born. I'd love to share it with you. And she was really, everything she'd written in her journal was exactly how I had felt. And it was actually very traumatic. This meconium, they cut the cord, they pulled me away, suctioned me, all this different stuff. So it was really kind of
validating.
Very validating. Yeah. And surprising to me too, to think that we can ask our own bodies and tune into that feeling, and realizing this, for me, realizing that you can heal by just bringing things to consciousness.
Yeah.
Because the more I deep dived, actually, my ancestors, my great-great-grandma had a stillborn. She had 2 stillborns. My great-grandma had a stillborn. My grandma had a stillborn. My mom didn't have any stillborns, but she suffered postpartum depression as if she did. Like severely suicidal. So I knew, just looking back on my history, that I was bound to repeat this if I didn't bring it to consciousness and heal it. And that was my job. So yeah, a lot of those things of bringing our birth stories, our ancestors' birth stories to consciousness, to let it go, give it a voice, find out why it's here, and let it go.
Did you find that when you did that process, some of the fears that you may have had around your upcoming birth of your first child, did those sort of subside as you were dealing with the feelings and the emotions related to the trauma from your birth and your ancestors' birth?
Yes, absolutely. And what's really interesting, I feel like certain emotions would come up that would bring back a memory. So it's the emotions that were coming up during the pregnancy were coming up divinely, so that could be healed and let go. So that my baby could come into this world not with the stuff that I was going to dump on him, you know? Yeah. Because that really was, to me, to be born emotionally free was very, like, you're not free if you're coming to this world with history. Yeah. You know?
With the imprints of other people passed on to you, essentially.
Yes. I feel like a lot of our generation's job is to see that, heal it and alchemize it.
Yes.
And that knowing that these babies coming through right now, they're coming to change the world. And their purpose is, I mean, we don't want to wait till they're older to be able to find their purpose.
Yep.
They're coming here to do what they need to do. And my baby, and I know so many people listening, have babies that are coming that need the same thing.
Yep. 100%.
They need to be able to be fostered and boom, change the world. That's their purpose.
I was just on a stream with a friend of mine, Beth Martins, yesterday, talking about the experience of raising a kid in a completely different way and the effect that you see, the difference in them. And it really is incredible. Like my son, the other day, we're laying underneath the stars before bedtime. We actually snuck out of his room, and I just had this epiphany, like, we need to go look at the stars. So we snuck out of his room behind Kylie so she didn't see or hear us. And we're just laying out looking at the stars. And suddenly he turns to me and says, Dad, have you ever thought that the stars are actually houses for our souls? And I was like, what do you mean by that? And he's like the stars are where we're actually from, and they're houses for our souls. And I said, like, each soul comes from a different house? And he's like, no. It's like there are families of souls that come from the same house and come to the earth at the same time as families from the same star. And that's the type of stuff that comes to him when approaching parenting and raising kids in this completely alternative, which I hate that word, but alternative way, is you see how incredibly tapped in they are. And I've discussed this so many times to where it's almost I won't say boring at this point, but it's like redundant, and it's almost rhetorical. How I've seen kids read blindfolded, how I've seen a variety of kids do that, how kids these days are coming in with these incredibly special gifts. And I think past generations had that as well, but I think the concentration and the amount of kids that are coming in like that is much higher now. One, because of the state of the world, and this is obviously a belief, I don't know this for sure, but also because we in this community are approaching parenting in a completely different way. And this is what we would have been like had someone done this for us.
Yes.
You know?
Yes. And I think there is kind of a mourning process too that goes through, that I had to go through personally, feeling like I wish I was the parent that I could be to my own kids, but how cool it is to be the one to raise the next generation that's ushering in this whole new era.
Yeah.
And to be cool, like, it feels cool though to have that contract, and I'm sure you relate, to be the one that gets to alchemize history.
It's a lot, but it's cool too. It is really cool. And it makes it all worth it when you see the results in your relationships, when you see the results in your kids. It makes it all worth it for sure.
I have to ask you, have you ever read the Ringing Cedars of Russia series?
So that's another example of a book that first off, like, I'm notorious for buying books. I do read them. My wife listens to this. She'll be like, yeah, you read like 3/4 of it and then stop and then go to a different book.
No, I get that. I'm so that.
It's a problem. It is definitely a problem. But I was just on Paul Chek's podcast the other day, and he said he has like 1,500 books. I'm like, okay, now I don't feel as bad. But to answer your question, I have that book series. I've interviewed Gabriel Miguel from the Anastasia Foundation in the U.S. I'm very familiar with the material.
Yeah.
I've not read the series yet, though.
Well, what's so interesting, what you just said, that story that you talked about with your boy, is that it specifically says that in the book, is bring your babies out to and look at the stars. And don't tell them about the stars. Ask them, and they will teach you.
Yeah.
So that kind of gave me goosebumps when you were telling me that story, because I've learned, I feel like a lot of the parenting advice in that book series has spoken to my soul. So
that's incredible.
Yes.
What was so cool about it is I have thought that already, and my wife has said that to me verbally. I know with certainty that she's never said that in front of my son. So for him to verbalize that on his own was like, oh my goodness. And I have a whole list of things on my phone that he's said over the past 3 years, like since he was 4 and could form somewhat complex thoughts. He's been saying things like that where I'm like, oh my goodness. And it's just, it makes it all worth it. And it's like, these kids are incredibly tapped in, and they already have this innate knowing in a variety of ways. We're just trying to help refine their help guide them to be in this physical realm. That's the way that I look at it.
Yeah. And mostly they're guiding us.
Yeah, absolutely. Like
really,
your baby
they're
guiding
here
you.
teaching us. Yeah, my babies have taught me everything. Everything. They've guided me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love that story. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, what I want to get into next is the birth certificate and social security number conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So as you were pregnant, how did you come across this information, and how did you even go about finding an approach to deal with the birth certificate and social security number? Because that's like, there's like learning about natural birth.
Yes.
And then there's learning about natural birth and learning that, oh, I don't want my son or daughter to be in a contract with the government and be in this sort of trust relationship with them. That's like a whole separate level.
Yes. And I didn't realize it. Like, I had learned a few things about the birth certificate when I was pregnant with my first baby, but just unpacking birth in itself, I spent my whole time, right, releasing generational trauma, learning about birth, knowing, like, at the very end, again, I'd never been around birth, but I was like, I want to have a free birth, and I've never even seen a birth, all these different things, right? So I ended up having this amazing birth. I had it with a licensed midwife, which I ended up having a conversation because I didn't even know the difference between licensure and all that until, I was 36 weeks or something. So at the very end, I talked to her about that, and she was like, oh, I'll be in the hallway if you need me. So that was kind of my compromise.
That's cool. I mean, that's so great, though. And there still are some awesome licensed midwives out there that, like, I know one in this area that is awesome, for example, and she is very hip to all the things we are. And she kind of says that the reason that she still approaches it that way is for the many people who are still outsourcing, like, I want someone who's licensed and credentialed. And I'm like, I can see that perspective a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and there aren't many, they're all going to be, they can all be licensed, but every midwife is going to be very different. So I am actually very lucky that I had one that truly was going to follow my wishes and not someone that was a bait and switch that due to lots of mothers that I hear stories often. So she was that for me. But it did come to the birth certificate. And there's this whole idea that you have to register your baby within 10 days of birth. So she came to me and was like, hey, so we need to register this baby within 10 days. I didn't know enough about the birth certificate. I had spent my whole pregnancy learning about birth that I was like, oh my gosh, I have 10 days. I'm postpartum, just learning how to be a mother. I had this conflict inside myself because I didn't want to get them a birth certificate, but I also didn't know how to raise him in society without one. Mm-hmm. So with knots in my stomach, I ended up filling out the information. I never signed it thinking like that made me feel a little better. But he ended up getting a birth certificate. So the next time I got pregnant, every time I was connecting to my baby, he kept telling me I need to be born free. So that kind of led this whole slew of a list of what does it mean to be free. Mm-hmm. But the birth certificate was an absolute. It was like, you need to figure out how to raise me without one.
Let's dive into that a little bit, just like some high level overview of the implications of getting a birth certificate or social security card.
Yeah. Okay. So like, what does that contract to you to? Yeah. Is that what you mean? Yeah. So really this idea that first it's an energetic contract that you're handing the title over to the government. You're saying, I'm not competent enough to raise my baby with authority, so I need the government to tell me what to do. Mm-hmm. So we really are handing our babies over to the government unknowingly.
Yeah.
And we're thinking, hey, it's a record of their birth, but it's not that at all. They're literally creating a business or a trust in our baby's name so they can make money off of our baby. The national debt is backed by their future labor.
Yep.
So when I knew what I knew at that point, because I hadn't really deep dived too deep with my first one with the learning about birth in itself. The second one, he threw me down the rabbit hole of what that really meant. And knowing what I knew, I could not in good conscience do that. Mm-hmm. So I knew I had to find a way to raise him in modern society to allow him the opportunity for anything, whether he wanted a driver's license or a job or he wanted to go to college. I wasn't going to inhibit him, but I also even wanted to give him the opportunity to choose if he wanted a birth certificate.
Bingo. So this is, can I comment real quick? So I've gone back and forth so much on this. 3 years ago, I was like, nope, never going to get a birth certificate again for my kids. And then there's a period of time where I'm like, okay, I know of various people who are able to reclaim their estate and use that to their advantage, discharge various public liabilities and things like this.
Yeah.
But then I also am learning how difficult the whole discharging space is, no matter which approach you're learning at this point in time. And then I really thought about it philosophically, and I'm like, is it right for me as a dad to make this decision on behalf of my child? And the more that I thought about it, I was like, no, it's not right for me to do that. If they ultimately want to, they can naturalize later on and get, I don't know if you can go get a birth certificate later on.
You actually can.
Oh,
you get
okay.
a delayed birth certificate.
Even like 13 years later?
Anytime.
Okay, so that's the last part I hadn't thought through. But I'm like, I'm sure they can do something, whether it's like a naturalization certificate. I don't know.
Yeah.
But the point is, I was like, okay, I can do that. I can have them handle that later on. Once I feel that they're competent to understand the implications, pros and cons of both sides, then they can make that decision on their own. And that's sort of where I sit right now. And me and my wife are on the same page, which is great.
Yeah. No, I felt that so deeply, where I was like, even me getting the birth certificate took choice away. So I had to learn a way to essentially set my baby up in a way that he could easily make that choice. And what I discovered in that is if you make your not your public records, you create private records. You can completely privately make your own records that replace the birth certificate. So just like we can create, government contracts, we create private contracts that the government still honors, and they still honor these private records that we create, and get your baby a passport. Really, the passport I discovered was the opportunity door for everything. So it was kind of those two things that I was like, hey, I need to figure that out. And at any point, if he decides, hey, I want to get a birth certificate, I've set him up in a way that he can easily choose to do whatever he wants. So really, I discovered there's 4 kind of key things you have to do if you want to give your babies an opportunity for anything. One, it's going to be making sure you make your private records for your baby.
I know you go into the details in a lot of your course, which you can find in the show notes during this episode, but just briefly, does that require getting a notary to sign? Does that require a witness in place of a notary?
Question. Yeah. So I've created templates, and on my journey, I wish I couldn't find other people that had all the answers. So I really relied on my baby to guide me, and I created these on my own. So essentially what I've done is I've created all the templates that I do offer for other people for what I did and created for myself. Some of them are completely private that I have witnesses, and others I do have a notary, because you're going to use them in different ways.
Got it.
But you're not publicly, you do one of those things as a newspaper posting. So that is something that is really important. You want a variety of different...
Declaring to the public that this occurred, so it is on the record publicly without contracting with the government.
Yes, exactly. Because there's going to be reasons for long-term records too. Because a lot of these records, what you're doing is you're creating evidence of aliveness when really most of the things we have right now are evidence that we're all dead entities of the birth certificate,
which is
right?
so wild to think about.
It really is.
Yeah.
So you're creating evidence of aliveness for your baby. And if any controversy was ever to arise in the future, you have all the evidence that you've created prior for long-term records, that kind of thing. So
can I pause real quick?
Yeah.
There's so many conflicting narratives in this sort of common law, like equity, commerce, all the law space, the alternative law space, let's say.
Yes.
And one of those that I've heard and I could see being plausible is that the birth certificate and the social is somehow actually tied to the placenta rather than the actual baby. Have you heard that before?
I definitely heard that, yes. Where the placenta is literally the baby's DNA twin.
Yeah.
Okay. So there are a lot of reasons why they do want to take your placenta, and they call it afterbirth. They do a lot of things to make you think the placenta isn't this incredible... if I could give it the honor, it does. Yes,
we'll talk about that later.
Yes, they make it sound like, just take the placenta, But they do tag it and tie it. Because I'm sure going down this route, looking at definitions and different things, that delivery means you're delivering baby placenta and the cord. And so when they can cut that cord, you can declare things as stillborns and certain things and then own the placenta and its DNA. So they legally own the DNA, the whole bit. So it's all tied together. Absolutely.
Okay, so back to the 4 things that you do.
Yes. Yep. So getting your baby's private records, getting them a passport based on nationality rather than citizenship. Getting your baby a trust, because really that's how we all have operated our whole lives, right?
Is it the trust where they're the trustee or the beneficiary?
So essentially how I've done it for my baby is they're the beneficiary right now.
Yep.
Until they become of age, they will become a trustee and take over.
Got it. Okay.
So there, kind of with trust, there's a million different ways you can get creative. That's how I've chosen to do it, but created a trust in his name with an EIN that he's going to operate out of. Because we've been operating out of a trust our entire lives with our social.
Yep.
But the government owns it, right? So essentially creating this private entity for him that he can operate out of intentionally.
In lieu of the trust that is created on his behalf, unbeknownst to us by the government, you are creating him a trust at the time that he was born.
Yes. So
That's
really
cool.
I started seeing, really there's a mirror to what the government's doing. We're mirroring it with intention, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, makes sense.
So creating a trust in his name, a private trust, he can operate in commerce however he chooses to that way. And then, the last thing was getting a life insurance policy that the trust owns. And that's really how you can do private banking and all sorts of different things, which opens a whole new slew of opportunities where he never really, if he wants to use public credit, he certainly can through his trust or opening an LLC with the trust being the owner. But the life insurance policy was a huge opening for the private banking aspect.
Can you share about that a little bit more?
Yeah.
Like some examples of what you can do?
So, what can't you do? That's the thing. There's so many things. So specifically an index universal life insurance policy, you can, so essentially when you're creating this, you create your family's private bank. You can create a private bank for your baby, however you choose to do it. But when your baby's old enough, if they want to take out a loan to start a business, buy a car, buy a home, they already have their own private bank that they can pull that money from and operate privately. So it's a whole...
With this life insurance policy?
Yes. Wow. Yep. So people think that life insurance is for like the death benefit. And yes, that's true. But life insurance is actually for the living. There are ways that you should be utilizing it and operating through living instead of using public. And what a lot of people don't realize is that's even how the banks are using it. The banks use it for their cash value, life insurance. You give them money, they invested in an insurance policy, create the money, so they're benefiting instead of us.
Wow.
So, and if you really go into this idea of Social Security, right, and realize that the Social Security is a trust insurance fund, all we're utilizing is the government's insurance fund. They're making money with interest on our money that we pay into it. So why the heck aren't we doing it privately for ourselves?
Got it. So that's what you're doing with this 4th thing that you do.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So instead of ever utilizing, because the government's they're the trustees of that Social Security insurance fund, and they're using that money however they choose, right? So why wouldn't we do that for ourselves? But we're the controllers and we're the owners, and you don't have to wait till you're 65 or have a disability or whatever to tap into it. Your baby and you can tap into that anytime they need to pull that money.
Yeah.
So
you're actually in control of it, and makes it, much better approach, obviously.
Yeah, because that is a question I get from a lot of people is like, oh, well, if your baby's goes unemployed, has a disability, needs Social Security, like all those, I think, programmed fears of like, but what if you don't?
Yeah.
Really, you're covered in every single way. You've done it privately, and he can do any of those things he wants, but he doesn't have to ask the government for permission.
Which is huge.
You created your own private bank.
Yeah. You're literally extracting the tentacles of the state from your children in every way. You're doing that by mirroring exactly what they do, again, mostly unbeknownst to us, and doing it in a private way.
Absolutely. Exactly.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
What are the common, like, frequently asked questions or pushback points that you get with adopting this approach? Because I can think of some off the top of my head where it's like, well, how do we approach I would never put my kid in preschool, but like, let's say I'm not going to judge. There are families out there who might have to. How do we approach that? How do we approach getting them a license when they get older? How can they, like, all these questions that come up, or how do I put them in sports programs in my local town?
Yep.
I'm sure you've had all these questions.
You name it, every single one of them, which is all valid because they all came up for me. Right? When I was deciding to go this path, it's like, well, how am I going to allow him to do all those things? Because I don't want to stop him from, if he wants to sign up for the local sports or he wants to go to college. I plan on homeschooling my kid, but if he chooses certain things, I'm not going to inhibit him. But really having those 4 things, you can literally do anything.
So you can do all those things.
All of those things.
So you have one of each, one who's has the birth certificate and one who doesn't. So, and have you seen it? This point, any difference with traveling or anything like that?
None. You get the passport, it looks just the same. No one's ever stopped us from traveling. And I know that is a concern that a lot of people have, is if I'm getting a passport, a non-citizen national passport, am I going to get stopped in Sweden? And no, they don't even know a difference.
Yeah.
So
you traveled internationally with him too?
Oh, my 2-year-old's been to over 25 countries. We've never been stopped.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So that disproves any of the,
So, and honestly, the passport is such an important key though, because when you show someone a passport and it shows your nationality, no one questions it. So, because most of the time you have to realize, why is someone asking me for my social or my birth certificate? You don't realize that it's just, they want to make sure that you can live here. And it really has nothing to do with the fact that the birth certificate or social proves something. They want to, the passport proves. And there's no question, really. And
that's where the U.S. is unique. And I wonder, like, what the approach would be with Canada and the U.K. and Australia, because I have a lot of people that are following my work and listen to the podcast from those countries. And I don't know if you haven't answered that, but before I get there, is that we do have this corporate, fictitious federal government on top of what were originally independent nation states, essentially, with each state being its own nation. And that's essentially what you're falling back into when you get the national passport approach. Got it.
Yeah. And basically getting it as a non-citizen rather than a citizen. Because when you contract as a citizen, that's how you're contracting.
Did you follow the copper moonshine stills method, or like a variation of it?
So a variation, yes. Plus, obviously, there's other secondary forms that you have to prove nationality instead of the birth certificate because they don't have one. They don't have a social, so there's going to be other forms that you have to prove that there was never
what's
registered.
The name? A DS12?
Oh, the DS10.
DS10, yeah.
So that is part of it. The hard thing is there's people out there that are saying, all you need is a DS10 and whatever. No, you also have to prove that there actually never was a state registered birth certificate.
Wow.
So a lot of people think, well, I can just give them the DS10 instead. But you can't. If you were registered, if there was a registration of the birth and the state has that, you also have to prove from letterhead from the state that there was no registration.
I have a question about your first, because you said you didn't sign the paperwork, right? But then a birth certificate was still created even with you not signing?
So acquiescence is consent.
Yeah. So it's a tacit agreement, essentially.
Yeah.
You didn't give a hard no, like, you will not do that on my behalf.
Yep.
That is so wild, though. Like,
it is.
So that's the risk of still having even a licensed midwife in some case. Like, you have to set a hard boundary, like, no, I do not want this to be registered in any way.
Yes. And that comes with a whole slew of other things, because so it is not illegal to not get a birth certificate.
Yeah.
But when someone has a license, their license does require them to register the birth.
So really, this is a perfect example of what Emily and I talked about in the episode, is that they either have to do what's right for their client or do what's in accordance with their licensure in this case.
Exactly what you had said in that interview is you can't serve two masters.
Yeah.
So it is really hard, and I'm not saying it's not impossible, but it is really hard to say, I don't want the state in my birth and then invite them into your birth.
Yeah. It's so tough because so many, I know of, for example, licensed doctors, I'm going to use this example, that I think are some of the most brilliant people I know, who I know are violating what the medical boards say they have to do, what their license basically calls them to do in a variety of ways every day. But like I said earlier, they maintain that license because they know that it means something to have a license. For example, there's been countless times over the past 3 years where one of my West Point classmates will hit me up and I'm sharing my perspective, and then I share a perspective of Dr. Andy Kaufman or Dr. Tom Cowan, and a cursory Google search will show that they had their licenses stripped from them. And they're like, oh, look, these guys are fraudulent. Not that not that you even need to cater to what other people think. But the point is, I could see where from the perspective of someone who is licensed, it means something to those who are still outsourcing to authority. But then it's so tough because then situations like this, how do you approach that? And it's like, as a client who wants someone who is had a good track record, who is trained in birth, but then having to balance that out with and your license. So like, how, you know what I mean? It's such a hard thing to approach.
It really is. And trying to find that person too, because maybe you may have a midwife and everyone's going to have their own conversations with their midwife, right? Are they willing to risk that license for you? That's a lot to ask someone, because a midwife with a license sees that as that's what puts food on their table too. So what are they willing to risk? So that's
but then it's like a thing where you can easily just be a birth keeper rather than a midwife. And I think a lot of the people who are licensed don't realize that.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. That's exactly the whole track. And honestly, I would argue that an unlicensed midwife has more experience than a licensed midwife does, because she doesn't have to abandon you after 42 weeks. She sees breech babies. She sees twins. She sees all these things that a licensed provider doesn't see or isn't comfortable seeing, and they pass that off. So I would argue that unlicensed actually can have more experience. And because I've known someone that's had their baby, they were with a licensed midwife, and that baby flipped breech in the middle of her labor. She's at the birth center, baby flips breech, and the midwife was like, okay, you have two options. You can either go home and I can try and find an unlicensed midwife that's hopefully able to assist you, or you can go to the hospital and have a C-section. To me, those aren't choices.
No.
To go home in the middle of labor, okay, don't tell me to get in my car when I'm in the middle of labor.
Zero.
Hopefully meet someone that I've never met in my whole life, or to get a C-section.
Yeah.
So to have a midwife, though, that sees your baby flip breech and they're like, well, I know that's a variation of normal. I'm totally comfortable. Let's continue on like we already were.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's kind of my spiel on.
And there's ways I think that people don't realize this as well, to limit liability. Because I could see where in many ways your license protects you from any liability associated with what might happen over the course of birth. But there's ways through private contracts where you can still make sure that you have some of the same protections that you would have with your licensure.
Yes. But that's the difference. Are you creating a contract with the woman with a license, or are you creating a contract with the woman?
Yeah. Big difference.
Big difference.
Big difference. Because when you're creating a contract with a woman with a license, you're ultimately creating a contract with the woman and the state as an intermediary.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you can help her, or she already is a woman that understands that she's a woman and she's not the license and she can show up how she wants to, that's a conversation you have to have with your midwife.
Yeah.
And depends on if your midwife's comfortable or not. And there's also other ways, though, where midwives can have PMAs and they can be licensed but still kind of operate
and do
privately
both.
too.
Yeah, like in some ways I'm doing the public thing, and in this case I'm doing a private thing because it's clear to me that you want a more less government involved in this birth.
Yeah, which I think is a beautiful balance that some people can have, where they can show up like how the person needs them to show up.
Yeah.
They have that ability either way.
Because either way, they're just sharing their training and their knowledge and holding space for that birth. And it's like, which approach am I going to use in this case?
Yeah.
It's actually a really good solution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that is the hard thing too. I know you and I were talking earlier about having like a baby in the hospital. It's really, really hard to show up to the public and say, hey, I don't want to have my baby in the public when the OB, because a lot of people will they'll get all their paperwork ready and they'll put the hospital on notice and they'll say, I do not want to have my baby a birth certificate. But they didn't realize that their consent was entering and having that licensed provider at their birth. So these people, and I worked with hundreds of families that later essentially found out their baby was registered against their consent.
Yeah,
okay?
that sucks.
They did say, hey, I said no, and I put you on notice, But what they didn't realize is when they walked into the hospital, they did give up their consent, just like someone that gets an attorney and the attorney represents them. They're basically saying, hey, I'm incompetent. I need you to represent me. That's kind of what we're doing.
Represent me.
Yes. Yeah. When we're showing up in the hospital, we're saying, I need someone to handle my affairs. So
that's a tough one for moms, though.
Yeah.
That, like, what if they are attempting a free birth? And thank God for emergency and acute care in cases like this, where it's like, okay, something is clearly going wrong. Let's get to the hospital. Have you figured out a way to navigate how to approach that with what you're educating people on with the birth certificate and social?
Yeah, well, yes and no. And I would say it all depends on how the OB likes to handle it, the hospital and the business, and how the state handles it. So there's a few different variations. So sometimes yes and sometimes no. I will say in the very end of all things, if you're going into it and you plan to have this beautiful free birth or something and you ended up in the hospital and things turned sideways and you found out your baby was registered, everything's going to be okay. I will say that everything's okay. Yeah. So don't lose yourself in that concept, because again, just as you were saying earlier, there can be benefits to having a birth certificate. So don't lose yourself. And I do want to touch on that first, because I know I've had people messaging me on Instagram, like in the hospital chair.
No way.
Multiple, more than I can even count. Wow. Like, what do I do to not register this baby? I got transferred, It's going to be okay. Handle your baby, just bond with your baby.
Well, they're literally in birth messaging you. Like, that is wild.
More times than I can even tell you.
That is so wild.
Because that's their concern, because they're afraid. And it's coming from a place of fear instead of a place of love. Yeah. And knowing no matter what, everything's going to be okay. Yeah. I will say that. I'm trying to remember where I was before I was saying, the hospital stuff. So yeah, it's going to be hard. There's not like a one way fits all. But I will say, when mothers and fathers come into the hospital and they're like on guard of like, no, that's a sure way that the hospital is going to kind of push back.
Yeah, for sure.
And legally, in their written codes, when they have to submit registration, they're going to tell you that's fine. You don't have to sign it. But legally, I have to report that I was witness at this birth. There's a few occasions, though, where I have had mothers and fathers, though, where the hospital did honor their wishes. Wow. Doesn't happen often.
Yeah, I feel like that'd be incredibly rare, though.
Incredibly rare. Yeah. So I do say free birth is the only way to or with an unlicensed midwife, or is the only way to guarantee, that you're not going to get a bait and switch somehow at the end. Because a lot of people will have these conversations. Everything's cool until the very end, Yeah. So that does happen. But as far as the registration goes, you don't have to sign the registration, again, because the provider was at your birth. They can sign off on that for you. But if you are going to try and make sure, you're still going to try and go this route, don't ever give them your baby's name. Mm-hmm. Don't give them their baby's name.
That's an easy way to do it then.
Yes. But then again, it depends on how the state's going to handle it. Because a lot of times what they'll do is they'll take mother's information that she used to book herself into the maternity ward.'s a reason why it's called a ward. Yeah. Okay, you're booking yourself. They're going to steal her information and they're going to tie that information to your baby.
I'm sitting over here trying to think of how you could navigate even that, though, too.
So I'll just say this. Whatever you put on that registration form, as long as the information doesn't match what the state's going to pull up for a birth certificate. Yeah. I'll let people fill in the blanks there.
That's where my mind was going too. I'm like, I wonder how you can navigate
That's really,
that.
Yeah.
At the least, it makes it much more challenging if you don't give your baby's name. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. But a lot of times, though, when you are trying to get this proof from the state that the birth, there was no registration, it's going to come back as infant Anderson and then all of mom's information. So they're going to expect you to amend the birth certificate. So if you can make a way...
What happens if you just refuse in that, though? No, I don't recognize that. I've never consented to this contract. Yeah,
that's a whole other thing in itself. And you either need to really, you really need to stand your ground and advocate for yourself. That's where I would go. You need to really push for it, where it's that's not my baby's information. Mm-hmm. That's what I would do.
Yeah.
But then if you're not comfortable doing that because you are having all these interactions with the state, which can be really uncomfortable for a lot of mothers and fathers. And that is one of the things that I help mothers and fathers do, is become confident with having these interactions with the state. But yeah, otherwise, you do amend the birth certificate, and then you kind of fix things on the back end. You know what I mean? But you can't leave your baby in the in-between.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's really kind of the worst place you can leave your baby, is then you aren't setting them up for success.
Right.
So
you brought up another point that I want to address, and I want to move on from the whole birth certificate, social security number conversation, is coming from this whole perspective in a place of fear, which I think a lot of people in the alternative law sovereignty space do. And I will fully admit there's been various points in time where approaching various processes, I was actually coming from fear. Maybe it was very subconscious and I had to sort of check myself, like, why am I approaching this the way that I'm approaching this? Is it from, this is a physical expression of me truly understanding, but also embodying here that no man or woman has authority over me, no matter what their title is? Or is it because I'm so afraid of what these so-called authority figures are going to do that I want to sign all the paperwork to make sure the contractual relationship there is set in my favor?
Yeah.
And I think that if you're coming at this in the latter perspective, you are setting yourself up, and in this case, your baby up for failure, because that's the energy that you're bringing into this. And the paperwork has to be just a physical representation of you truly understanding and embodying who you are in relationship to these other men and women. That's all they are, that happen to call themselves government. And that has to come first.
Boom. That was a mic drop right there. You said it so beautifully. Because I think people come to me hoping that the paperwork is going to make them free or whatever. And it, just as you said, the paperwork backs your knowing and who you are. So when these people come into the hospital and they're thinking the paperwork is going to speak for them, like, look, the paperwork says, I put you on notice. Don't give my baby a birth certificate. But they aren't walking in knowing who they are and who they're speaking to. I would say that is the difference between the few that have had a hospital birth and didn't get their baby registered, is because they walked in knowing who they are. Yeah.
It really does change the dynamics of the situation when you're coming in with that energy. Like, you think in the most extreme versions, I know people who throughout the whole charade of 2020 and beyond never even got approached about wearing a mask. And some, according to their claims, I do question this a little bit, even in airport situations, maybe they were just drinking and eating the whole time, but they were just like, I really just understood that no man or woman can tell me what to do. And I wasn't aggressive in that. I just had such a coherent heart-based space that I had cultivated for myself, and I was so in tune with who I am and so trusting of God that no one bothered me.
Yeah, because they know you're not someone to mess with. You hold that vibration.
Yeah.
So it is about living and holding that vibration. And I always say you can still go this route and still have a licensed midwife. You can still have an OB, but truly I feel like having a free birth and really taking responsibility for your birth is one of the initiations that prepares you for this path.
I could see that. I could totally see that.
There's a lot of preparation because this is not the easy path. Because there is going to be a million people out there that are going to tell you, give them the birth certificate, give them the social, or you can't X, Y, or Z.
Yep.
You can X, Y, and Z, but you're going to have to be able to stand up. Exactly. You're going to have to stand up and you're going to have to advocate for yourself. And again, you show up through love. And the only way you're going to be able to teach these people, because most of these agents, they don't know. Just like you were saying, you walked into Target during COVID and the front desk was telling you had to put a mask on. Well, no, you didn't. But they also hired that person that doesn't know really that's not, they can't make you do that. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Right.
So all these agents that you're you're interacting with, they're going to tell you, no, you can't. And what you're doing is you're connecting through love and you are lovingly actually teaching them how to do their job.
Yep.
And they're going to discover, oh my gosh, sure enough, you can.
Right.
And that's going to open a whole new door for other people trying to go this path too. But you have to be the trailblazer and have these interactions and be comfortable with these interactions. So again, that's kind of why I say these initiations, because during pregnancy, there's a million initiations you go through on your own, and then birth. That's a whole other initiation. And then that's really just setting the stage for, can you raise a free baby?
Mm-hmm. Hey y'all, I'm here with Melissa Kupsch from Remedy Academy of Homeopathy. We are so stoked here at the Way Forward to be partnering with Melissa and Remedy in order to spread the message of homeopathy across the world, and also to partner on the eventual development of healing centers across the United States.
People are pretty quickly coming to realize that frequency is the future of medicine. We are witnessing the great resurgence of homeopathy right now. We're really moving away from that suppressive medical model. Whether it's for eczema, asthma, hormones, fertility, anxiety, depression, trauma, whatever it is, it all starts as energy in the person's field first. If we change our field, we can completely change our life. Our 2-year academy is open worldwide to anyone who wants to become a homeopath. We've got 5 lecturers and we currently have over 500 students enrolled, which is record numbers in our field. A career in homeopathy is amazing for anyone who wants flexibility in their work and who wants to be valuable in creating this new world. We have stay-at-home parents enrolled. We have ex-medical professionals, grandparents signed up who want to learn how to heal their grandchildren and pass on that invaluable knowledge. We even have husband and wife teams. So my husband enrolled in the course with no prior knowledge of health as a background, and he is loving it.
Kylie is also enrolled as well, so my partner is, and she's so stoked to become a homeopath and to be helping to spread this message across the world.
The thing that we hear from so many of our students is, I found my thing. Homeopathy is the key. We harness frequencies from nature and we alter the field of all creations. So if anybody wants to join us or they want to know more about it, they can visit our website.
Yeah, and all that information will be in the show notes. So if you want to learn more about Remedy Academy, also RMDY Collective, also some of the homeopathic products that they have, please just head to the show notes. All of that will be listed there. Most healthcare today operates on an outdated mechanistic model, treating the body like a battlefield rather than a self-healing system. You wait months for an appointment only to receive a rushed diagnosis that labels you rather than truly understanding your unique health. Even in holistic health, many practitioners rely on endless lab tests and supplement protocols, addressing symptoms instead of the root cause. And the result? Another prescription or supplement regimen that merely suppresses or masks symptoms rather than facilitating true healing, whether the imbalance was physical, emotional, energetic, or a mix of all three. And that's why Dr. Tom Cowan co-founded the New Biology Clinic, to offer something radically different. As one of the most respected natural health doctors in the world, Dr. Cowan has spent decades challenging conventional medicine and advancing a deeper understanding of human biology, water, and natural health. His work isn't just about rejecting the mainstream, it's about offering a more truthful, biologically coherent approach for healing. The New Biology Clinic recognizes that health isn't about fighting disease, it's about restoring balance. You're not a diagnosis, you're an individual with a unique story, and healing should honor that. With virtual consultations available worldwide, the clinic offers a flat-rate monthly membership that gives you direct access to practitioners who take the time to actually listen. Members also get exclusive health live streams, a resource library, and live sessions covering everything from biofield tuning and breathwork to movement and meditation, all designed to support whole body healing. And if you're not ready for a membership, you can book a one-time appointment, sign up for an enrichment-only membership for the healing modalities alone, or schedule a free connection session with one of the care team members to see how the New Biology Clinic can help in your specific situation. This isn't about keeping you dependent on doctors. It's about making you sovereign over your health. Head to newbiologyclinic.com and use code THEWAYFORWARD, and that's spelled The Way, F-O-R-W-A-R-D, for $50 off account activation, or just head to the show notes for more info. If you're a member of The Way Forward, email hello@thewayforward.com for $150 off. Your body already knows how to heal, and New Biology Clinic helps you remember. And so for anyone who wants to work with you, learn more about this, you offer resources and things like this, right? And we're going to put all that in the show notes, but just share a little bit about what you do.
Yeah. So I offer, really, if you want to replace the birth certificate, all the templates, all the verbiage, all the things, and deep instructions on how you would create your private records for your baby, to replace the birth certificate, exactly how to get the birth certificate without how to get the passport. I'm not teaching people how to get birth certificates. You can find that from someone else. I teach people how to get a passport without the birth certificate, step by step, without contracting your baby. And then beyond, getting a trust in their name, getting a life insurance policy in their name, really how to function in society.
Is there any
them.
like life insurance policy? Like, do you have someone you recommend that they go to specifically?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool.
Yep. Because again, most people you go to, they're going to tell you can't do that without a birth certificate and social. But I found a way, and I have a guy that will get your baby a insurance policy with a passport. So
it's really cool because your kids are an example that all of this fear and questions that come up, which are justifiable because we've been so indoctrinated to receive these various contracts, to enter into these contracts with the state. But your kids are an example that you can do pretty much everything that you need to do to interface with society while still maintaining your privacy and your sovereignty in the process.
Yeah. Yeah. It really does feel like seeing the whole game board and knowing when to jump in and when you can realize you're a man and walk away.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I love being able to teach my little ones that so that they can grow up doing that.
I guess the last question on this is, from my understanding, and there's different schools of thought on this, but where I sit right now, when you go get a loan from a bank, they ask you for your social because they're actually tapping into your account in order to pull the credit and then issue your credit, and then you're making payments on it at interest.
Yeah.
So when it comes to getting a bank account with your son, obviously you're not at that point yet, I'd imagine.
So getting a bank account in their trust name. But if you want to use the public credit system, create an LLC in their name.
Okay. Well, yeah, and obviously because the trust has an EIN, so you can just get a bank account through the trust. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's through a private EIN, again, that you're not registering with the state. So you're doing that all privately. So yeah, that's exactly how you do it.
Is it easy to get a private EIN?
So you get a private EIN, but you're not registering it with the state.
Yeah.
So you can get an EIN, a foreign EIN, yes.
Okay, got it. Okay, I see what you're saying there.
Foreign.
Now I'm picking up what you're putting down. Okay. So the next thing that I want to talk about, again, is going beyond birth, not the actual process of birth itself. Maybe we'll touch on that a little bit throughout this conversation.
Yeah.
But I want to talk about lotus birth next, especially because when I brought up the placenta earlier, you were like super stoked and excited. So yeah, let's go there.
Yeah. I don't feel like the placenta gets the honor. And I there's a reason why they've made you think it's after birth. They make women think it's just this gross thing, and they want to, again, too, I feel like there's another reason why they're creating this consume your placenta idea. There's a lot of different things. And first, I'll say, do what you feel called to. When I was being guided by my baby, lotus birth kept coming up. And it had been a concept that I had never even heard of, or I'd never heard of anyone else doing. And when I asked my midwife for my first baby about it, she was like, well, yeah, we've heard people doing it, but I've never met someone to do it. So I really didn't have a lot of resources. I just kind of had to go with my baby's guidance. But a lotus birth is when you have the baby and you leave them, baby, umbilical cord, and the placenta attached until it naturally falls off. So there's a lot of different reasons for doing that, which I realized, first of all, there's going to be the physical benefits, right? When a baby's born, a third of their blood is still in the placenta. So you're allowing all of that blood, all of those stem cells, all of those things to go to the baby. Because birth can be traumatic. No matter how gentle you give birth, baby goes through a lot.
Yeah, for sure.
And so baby's blood is thin, and there's a lot of that blood still in the placenta, and the purpose for it is so it can go to areas of the baby's body quickly and heal with all those stem cells. So when you're in the hospital and they're cutting that source off, there's no reason it's obvious why we're having problems, right? You're cutting them off from their oxygen source, creating this emergency, all the blood, all the stem cells, and then crazy that we're then injecting vitamin K in them to make their blood thick when it should be going to places in their body to quickly heal.
Right.
So, I had this theory that if autism and things like that is inflammation in the brain that probably stem cells could heal.
Mm-hmm.
Would we have that problem if we were allowing all a baby's blood to go where it needed to go?
It's a good question.
And we weren't injecting them to thicken their blood. You know, there's some thoughts to think about. You know,
for sure.
I don't have data to back that up, but I would love to see a generation of that.
Yeah.
But so first and foremost, there's this physical part. So a lot of people that I talk to, they'll argue that, okay, so once all the blood's to the baby and now the cord is white and flat, what's the purpose of the placenta at this point? And I'll say a lotus birth, what it does is it goes beyond that. Because after those first 24 hours, all the blood is gone, but now we're going into the spiritual benefits. It's a spiritual practice.
Okay.
So this concept that baby is born, okay, again, the placenta is its twin. There's a lot of ancient civilizations that believe that that twin is basically the baby's spirit guardian angel.
Wow.
Bringing them in, they're born together, okay? And even though the physical placenta dies in this earth, they are always advocating for that baby in the invisible realm.
Mm-hmm.
And that placenta spirit is also the one that's going to help guide them through transition. So I kind of often wonder too, we're always afraid of this transition into the afterlife, or that we're not like being watched out for. But if you always had that deep knowing that you're always protected and you're always guided, how would that change who you are in this earth?
It would change a lot for a lot of people.
All those fears of those things are gone to have that imprint. Okay. Lotus birth, I would say, is the most amazing imprint you can put on your baby. Baby is born with one aura. So the moment, and that's around baby, umbilical cord, and the placenta. So when you're cutting that cord, you're also opening up that aura. That aura is your first line of defense for your immune system, first and foremost. Not for, and energies entering.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're opening that aura, what are you exposing your baby to?
Wow.
So
Good
keeping
point.
that. So, and the thing is our babies, they have this vitality to be able to heal that aura. But if they did have a traumatic birth or something like that, and they're healing other parts of their body, and they don't have the vitality to heal that aura too, that's a lot of life force. So it really is this intact life force that you're giving them by allowing them to stay connected. It's really incredible. And I think it's kind of crazy, actually, that we've decided that baby doesn't feel that cut.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you look at a baby, and I encourage you, when you have your baby, touch the placenta, you're going to notice that baby feels every touch.
Interesting.
It's crazy how they respond. So part of this ceremony, I feel, is asking your baby if it's okay to touch it, and they'll give you permission. They love their placenta. They love each other, and recognizing this relationship they have together is pretty profound. And you only notice it if you're doing it with intention. So, which I think is part of this beautiful practice in itself, is honoring baby, honoring the placenta, and allowing baby to choose when they're ready to transition earthside.
So you did a lotus birth with your second?
With both.
With both
babies. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, you went deep really fast with your first thing to go all the way from like, how do
showed
I
me
do any of
everything.
this stuff?
Yes.
Like, oh, lotus birth. Okay.
Yeah.
So why did you not stop at what a lot of people in the holistic alternative space stop at is, oh, I don't want to get rid of my placenta. I want to wait till the blood goes into out of the placenta into the baby, that the cord is now white. And then I'm going to turn my placenta into capsules to consume afterwards. Because that's what a lot of people do.
Yeah.
So what made you go beyond that?
So first asking my baby to guide them, or to guide me to what he needed.
Because had you ever heard of a lotus birth before?
Never.
Whoa.
Never.
That's
so
wild.
I just I was so guided to it. I was like, I have to do this thing.
Yeah.
And it sounds so weird. And bless my husband's heart, everything I've brought to him is weird. And then eventually he's like, okay, let's do this weird thing.
Yeah.
And then we do it, and we're like, we would never do it any other way.
Awesome.
To see the spiritual benefits that it's brought for our baby, just that imprint in itself, it was deep in my bones that he needed to decide when he was ready to transition earthside. Because any postpartum mother is going to tell you there is this in-between worlds. Okay, you leave this planet really to retrieve your baby, and a few days after, even, you guys are both like
in between
you're
worlds.
not here.
Yeah.
So I kid you not, the moment my baby, both of them, chose to detach, we both landed on this earth.
Really? That's what it felt
This
like?
consciousness, oh, yes. And I can't even describe to you the feeling of like, I felt my capacity completely expanded.
You know, it's interesting with that too, because like the placenta is fundamentally a part of you while you're in the process of growing a baby. So maybe there is some energetic element when you do cut the cord. It is like making it so that whole energy of the birth and the baby growing is no longer present anymore. Whereas if the placenta stays intact, you as a mom are still within that energy as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you're nailing it. It completely is. It's a connection between mother baby. You can keep that connection energetically, even though they physically detach. You are still completely attached. And it's same with their intuition.
Mm-hmm.
Like our intuition's right here in our gut. You get that gut feeling. That's absolutely this connection with your placenta.
Mm-hmm.
So cutting of the cord, most people don't even realize why do we do it in the first place. It is a separation ritual.
Wow.
It's a separation.
Yeah, like why is it that we do that? That's such a good point. Like I've never really thought of that. Like why are we not trusting that the body will get rid of that thing when we're ready?
Yes.
Yeah.
So again, my baseline is how did our pristine ancestors live? And I imagine, say I was the first person on this world to have a baby and I got pregnant and I spent my entire pregnancy just in trust of this baby. Okay. This baby comes out. A moment later, the placenta comes out. Why in that moment would I decide that's when I need to intervene?
Yeah, that is so wild.
And the fact to me that it does naturally detach shows me that it was divinely supposed to be that way.
And there's no issues with like the belly button or anything like that afterwards?
No. So my babies, so they say it can fall off anywhere between 2 to 10 days.
Mm-hmm.
Both my babies, it fell off like 2.5, 3 days. So what's really interesting is when you cut the cord, it generally stays on from 7 days to 2 weeks.
Yeah.
That little
like nub afterwards
stays
yeah.
much longer than it does when you let it naturally detach. And there's a lot higher for infection by cutting it.
Interesting.
So, but a lot of people will tell you, oh no, baby's going to get sepsis or something by leaving this rotting organ. First of all, you're not letting the organ rot. You do dress it with salts and herbs and you create this whole ceremony of it. But that cord, it hardens within 24 hours. So there is no blood any longer going between baby and the placenta. Again, at that point, it's all spiritual. But yeah, the whole idea that sepsis happens and it's going to create infection, all that research is funded by industries that make money by you giving them your placenta.
And so you've done it twice and you've had no issues?
None.
Yeah. Do you have a lot of friends who've done it now too, or people you know that have tried a lotus birth?
Yeah. So I have a lotus birth kit that I created just because I'm so passionate about it. I love it. And a lot of people think it sounds like a nuance where it's like, oh, that sounds like a lot of work to have this placenta and baby. So what I've done is I have a whole kit that has the salts and the herbs and the bag. Essentially, you put it in a little bag with some absorbent pads that you just keep next to baby, and then it falls off a few days later. And so it's just super easy. I've made it convenient for something that's inconvenient, because a lot of people want to cut the cord too, because they're like, that's just so inconvenient to have a baby and a placenta. But that's kind of the point. You're not passing a baby around like a casserole when they have a placenta.
You're supposed to just be mom and baby laying there together.
Exactly.
Yeah, wow, it really like makes you slow down and makes it so, okay, stay out of my space. Let me remain in this energy for a while.
Exactly.
Wow.
It's meant to be that way. So that's to me why every part of the process is divine. Why do we interfere with it?
Yeah. It's so wild that I hadn't even questioned that either. Like, I'm really over here reflecting on my own cognitive dissonance of like, oh, here's another piece of something where it's like, yeah, why do we do that? Like who said that this is what needs to be done, that you have to cut it because X, Y, and Z, when we're not just trusting the body to do exactly what it was designed to do? We
were created connected.
Yeah.
We weren't born with scissors.
Yeah. It's so wild. It's wild.
Yeah.
And on that same note, and this is one that I have now finally gone through the cognitive dissonance of this. And I'll say primarily, this might be TMI, but whatever. So I played professional handball in Germany, and in the locker room, I noticed that I was one of like 3 people that were circumcised. The other teammates of mine were not circumcised. We're completely uncircumcised.
They're intact.
They're intact.
Yeah.
Intact. And this is back in like 2017, 2018, 2019. And I really started to question that at that time because unfortunately, and I still feel bad about this, but I was doing the best that I could at the time. And I'll even defend my wife here. She was the one saying, I don't know if we should do this. And I was pointing to, well, like I've been circumcised and I'm fine. I'm like, do I really know that though? Like, is there a lot of trauma still left there?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think I've worked through a lot of my childhood shit. I think it's always, a continual journey. But the point being is we did make that decision with our son. And I'm like, damn, dude, like now knowing what I know, I wish I would have never done that. Mm-hmm. And when I was in Germany, seeing like most people were fully intact, I'm like, okay, this idea that it's unclean to be fully intact is clearly not the case because here are all these people. And then I started looking into statistics and I don't remember off the top of my head, but I want to say like a large portion of the population in Europe is fully intact and in virtually all other countries. And it's really unique to the United States, I think Australia and some of the other more Commonwealth countries, you could say. Mm. And yeah, so your thoughts on circumcision?
Yeah. I mean, just as you said, the United States and Israel actually is one of the only places that routinely circumcise. And it is one of those things where we've been taught all these lies. Again, like you look at the whole rest of the world where they're living perfectly fine with intact men. And we're saying, hey, it's for cleanliness or to prevent cancer.
That's what they say. They say it's to prevent cancer.
Yes.
It's insane.
To prevent STDs, different things like that. And we've all been sold a lie.
Yeah.
Right? And I've had to kind of conceptualize all of this too, to go down each one of those paths where they tell you that it's for cleanliness or to prevent infection or things like that. But what they do in the United States is if you decide not to circumcise, they'll say, okay, so in order to keep it clean, you're going to have to pull that back and you're going to have to clean it for your baby. What people don't realize is that skin is sewed together, essentially kind of like your fingernail on your thumb. So when you're pulling that back, you're ripping a fingernail off them.
So that's incredibly painful.
Imagine now you're creating this scar, and now that is going to get tight and that is going to cause issues because no one should be pulling that back but your baby when they're ready as they grow. Mm-hmm. So they're teaching you how to incorrectly handle a intact baby that, there's going to cause problems.
Based on the presupposition that this is not
unclean.
Normal or unclean, which is literally insane.
Yeah.
Like insane.
Yeah. Is a sucker with a wrapper cleaner than a sucker that doesn't have a wrapper on it?
No.
Yeah.
Right. No.
Yeah. So it's pretty kind of crazy. And then I think too, they say, well, to me, I'm like, okay, so if the skin doesn't matter, then why aren't we removing our earlobes? Because they don't have a purpose. If we're saying there is no purpose for it, there's a lot of different things I've had to kind of relate it to prevent cancer. Okay, should we remove the breast buds of all little girls to eventually prevent breast cancer? Would that be ethical?
Yeah, but it's also the presupposition that those things actually statistically lead to breast cancer or to like testicular cancer or something like this. Is that what they say it is? It's like it leads to testicular cancer?
Not like penile cancer.
Mm-hmm. That is insane. Like I would really love to see the studies that actually determine that. I guarantee that they don't.
Yeah. But it's so hard because we're so trusting. Again, we're outsourcing our authority, and that's what everyone does. Mm-hmm. So, which is really funny that you mentioned that you're seeing all these other men that are intact as you're going around the world. But here, I remember when I was telling the girls that I was working with that I wasn't going to circumcise, and they're like, well, what are you going to do if your baby, when he grows and he's in the locker room, he's going to get made fun of. So that is something that a lot of people will do, circumcise their baby just because they don't want them to be made fun of.
I would say that was partially some of the conditioning that I had when I'm making that decision on behalf of my son. I'm like, that's absurd. Like, that is insane to think about now.
Yeah. When you can step away from it and see it and start questioning, well, why do we do this in the first place? It is pretty crazy. To me, I believe that they sabotage birth on purpose because they know how transformative that is. The way we come to this earth is so important. And to have a baby that's a day old, a few days old, to be taken from their mother, first of all, when they go get circumcised, they have to make that erect. Okay. So someone is sexually abusing that baby, and we're allowing that to happen. Then they're peeling back the skin. And they say 90% of babies aren't even numb. They give them sugar water.
Oh my goodness.
But even think about numbing them, how much trauma that would cause too. It's like you can't win, really.
Yeah.
So, and then you're cutting the skin, and now your baby is going through the most traumatic moment of their life. And they're wondering, well, where the hell is my mom that's supposed to be protecting me?
Yeah.
So energetically, what that does on a boy and his relationship with his mother.
Man, that's a really good point.
That's an imprint. And
for sure.
Brain scans will show you their brains are never the same.
Wow.
Their brains change when you experience that level of trauma.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
So now you have these babies that, a lot of them pass out because of the trauma. And now they're changed, So to me, I would say, have you gone into like the whole MK Ultra type? Do you know MK Ultra?
Oh, I know what MK Ultra is. I thought you meant like
yes.
MK Ultra related to this specifically.
So I'm kind of shifting gears a little bit.
How deep have you gone into MK Ultra?
So MK Ultra, this concept of fragmenting the mind through either drugs or trauma. This to me is this fragmentation through trauma that we're imprinting on these babies.
I mean, like, think how many ways, even aside from circumcision, which in and of itself is horrible.
Yeah.
Babies and mom, but let's focus specifically on babies. Through birth in overwhelming majority of Western countries are just bombarded with trauma, toxicity, and all these things. Like even the birthing environment itself, circumcision a few days after, or sometimes just a few hours after, bombarded with all these injections that are put in them, all these tubes like suctioned and like cord clamping, like all of the things, that happen at the time of birth is all traumatic in the birthing system that we're in right now. Yeah.
And a traumatized person is easier to control.
Yeah.
So that really is so purposeful, everything they're doing. And that's, aside from the fact that they actually do sell the foreskin and they make creams and beauty creams and all sorts of things out of infant foreskin. Yeah. So there's a whole industry that's making billions off baby foreskins too.
It's gross.
It's really gross.
Yeah, it's disgusting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'd say the biggest thing really is these imprints that we're creating on these babies. And the fact that we've been so indoctrinated as mothers to hand our babies over to a stranger to erect our baby's penis and genitally mutilate our babies.
Yeah.
And it is interesting how we think, okay, we would never do that to girls. They do that in some countries, and that just sounds barbaric, but we're doing it to boys every day here.
What do they do to girls in some countries?
Circumcise them.
What?
Mm-hmm. Like Egypt is one of the more common places for women circumcision.
Circumcise what part?
Like the clitoris.
No way.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So that sounds crazy.
That is insane.
But why do we think that
I know.
boys,
that
we're
sounds
like,
more
boys,
crazy
that's
to
fine.
me than the boys thing because it is so normalized.
Yeah.
Not normal.
Yeah.
Normalized.
But people also don't realize that when we cut off that skin, that is the most sensitive part of the penis. We literally are cutting off the clitoris of the,
Oh my God.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
And then we realize, we wonder why we have all these men with, I don't know, rage issues or feelings towards women in general or all these different things. How much can it be related to? There is a whole healing that goes into circumcision too. And my husband had to go through all that too when we were deciding not to circumcise my son. Because what's really interesting, when we first decided not to circumcise my son, we were sitting in a living room, with my mom and my stepdad. And he was like, oh, so you're pregnant. We just had announced that we were pregnant. And he was like, so are you going to vaccinate? And we had both gone down that rabbit hole, luckily, because of I found out I had a childhood vaccine injury. We were both like, absolutely no, we're not vaccinating. He's like, oh, are you going to circumcise? And I think at that point I was like, wait a second. For the first time, I think I need to question this.
Wow.
Because of the question he had just asked prior.
Yeah.
My husband, though, immediately he was like, well, yeah. And I was like, wait, honey, let's go home and talk about this. Because maybe we need to research this first. So luckily, we were able to go do the research first and make that decision. But it sent him through a whole mourning process of himself.
Yeah.
And there is a whole healing when it comes to really realizing what happened to you.
Yeah. I don't know if it's like I've done lots of trauma healing related
Mhm.
work,
Mhm.
or if it's that I've not unpacked that and it's like just so deep in my psyche or somewhere in between. I feel pretty put together as a human being. So like
Yeah.
if you did make the mistake as a parent, don't shame yourself. Like the body is resilient. The
Yes.
human being, this thing that we're experiencing is incredibly resilient.
Mhm.
And that's what I tell myself related to like my own having had that done to me. And then also my son is like, okay, you're doing the best you could at that time with what you had and you didn't know any better. And
Yeah.
so what do you do from here?
Yes. And I love that you said that, but it is taking that responsibility.
Yeah.
And now that you know better, you do better, but you have to give yourself grace, every mother and father out there. Because we even had, as my husband was going through his own, mourning process and realization of what happened to him and being sad, I guess that part of him was taken away, having those conversations with his own mother and her having to go through that too, feeling like she had done something to harm him. And there's a whole, I think if we can have these conversations, there's a whole healing that can come to it.
Yeah.
Because giving us all grace that we didn't know. And we would never do that to our kid if we knew.
Right.
So yeah, loving yourself first. And just as you said, the body is so resilient. Our bodies know exactly how to adapt to. And we're here. I mean, all the body knows how to do is to heal.
Amen.
That's all it knows.
Amen.
So let it.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing that I want to talk about on that note is the experience of healing as a mom who has gone through a very traumatic birthing experience. Because I think a lot of moms that might be interested in a more free birth or natural birth are fearful because they've already had a traumatic birthing experience themselves. They've heard of these horror stories, or maybe there's someone who was trying for a natural birth or like even on the other end of that, a free birth, and things didn't go well. And I know people personally who have these experiences. How do you go about addressing that while also wanting to get pregnant again and have a birth and try to adopt this more natural approach again? In the face of those, I don't want to call them failures, but in the face of those situations?
Yeah, I love that question. So everything happens as a learning experience, right? And is divine as things start happening too. And I say as we're pregnant, as we're going through these things, all these feelings and emotions come up, they all boil to the surface. And I say it fast tracks during pregnancy. You have to have all these conversations with all of these fears. Everything's coming up purposefully. And a lot of times if we just kind of shove it away and we're like, oh, morning sickness is normal. And instead of addressing like, why is this showing up and having a conversation with it? And again, maybe even having a conversation and maybe ancestral stuff is going to come up. Maybe it's not even yours, but allowing it to have a voice, that's really the key. So what I've done is I've created, because of my own experience, really everything I've created is just what my babies have guided me to, is I went through all these experiences as a baby. I even went through like, what do I think my parents' relationship was like when I was conceived? That's an imprint on me. The way I was born, we're more likely to give birth in a hospital if we were born in a hospital. So the way trauma works is when something happens, situations and scenarios in our life are always kind of being recreated so that we can have another chance at it, to either heal it or repeat it. So these scenarios come up for us either to see it, have a conversation with it, heal it, or to repeat it.
Right.
So reclaiming our birth is really, really, really important. And I created a whole, I don't even know, course, I guess you could call it, on the whole concept of reclaiming your birth, where you're going through each of these things, realizing what happened to you, feeling it in your body, having a conversation with it. And I'm going to give you an example for what happened to me. So when I got pregnant with my first baby, I was told I couldn't get pregnant. So when I surprise got pregnant, me and my husband, we had a trip planned. And I feel so sad because the moment I found out I was pregnant, we were both like, well, what are we going to do about that trip? That baby, no one knows about it for the first few weeks. And the moment that we found out, that was our response.
Yeah.
And that's an imprint.
Right.
So I did have to have a lot of these conversations with my baby and say, you know what, that had nothing to do with you. I'm so excited for you, to kind of create a new imprint for him. But as I was going through my own birth story, I was like an oh shit baby with my mom.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking of how many ways in my life, too, have I created this scenario of feeling unwanted because of my own imprint. So it's fascinating, honestly, to start really deep diving your own birth story. And I recommend people do this. Don't ask your mom or your dad or anyone that was at your birth, because they're going to have a different, they're going to have a different lens of the experience than you are. But tap into your body and ask your body, how did it feel for you? Because that's real. Have a conversation with it and then create a whole new imprint. So I do a meditation with people that creates a whole new imprint. What does it feel like to be born to a mother that trusted you, trusted her body, and had this whole experience of you got to choose when you came. You got to choose how you were born. And you were greeted by the loving hands of your father. And you're, creating a new imprint. So now you have this imprint to bring your baby into this world. And what my babies guided me to do is that I sat down, me and my husband, and we asked my baby, we're like, how do you want to be born? We wrote it down, and we wrote it down in detail. And we meditated on this birth, that our baby kind of showed us what that looked like. And then I asked my baby to guide me to a song. So a song showed up. My baby picked this song, and every single day I would get ready in the mirror listening to this song with this birth that they had already told me that that's what it looked like. And I saw that birth 1,000 times before he came. And they were exactly the same way for both babies. So I think we forget that we're creators. We're co-creating with our baby. And when we involve them and ourselves and we create this image, it's going to happen exactly that way. So to start taking back that power when maybe things turn sideways in the past, maybe taking those things for conversations that we can have, like what was showing up in that moment that I could heal in myself, because it came for a lesson or a way to evolve us, right? And to teach us something. And how can I create my next birth? Co-create with me, my partner, and my baby. And
I love that.
Yeah.
I think one of the big things that comes up in this space for people who are wanting to approach birth in a more natural way, speaking specifically to the crowd of women who have tried and then it was unsuccessful or it didn't go the way they planned, they carry this shame like they weren't good enough, like they didn't do it right, like something is fundamentally wrong with them. How do you go about addressing that specifically?
I love that question. It is more so even tapping into that idea. If it makes them feel like they're not good enough, there's something in that feeling of not good enough.
Yeah.
And where is that coming from? So it really is, it's like pulling out all the layers of self before you're ready. And a lot of times it's the body's way of just showing you there's something deeper. So as deep as you can go into yourself, it's showing up for a reason.
Beautifully said. Yeah. Beautifully said. As challenging as that is ultimately what's true.
Yeah. But that's the refinement too. And again, you start realizing those are the initiations that prepare you for eventually having that baby. Because there are a lot of women, like you said, they have this like spirit baby that's calling them. They desire to be a mother so deeply, but there's something in between them. And there's something deeper to go into. And again, I feel like a lot of times even reliving our own conception, birth, all that stuff, unpacking that is really what opens up that healing for them.
And you would say this applies like whether it was a past birth experience that you're now pregnant again, trying to heal that, or this happened 2 weeks ago and it's literally, I just gave birth and it was incredibly traumatic. This is the way that you would recommend approaching it?
Yeah. Going back to how you were brought into this earth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's continuing to show up. I've had so many conversations on that lately, like conversations with Melissa Kupsch, who's a homeopath. We talked about that. Another conversation on family constellations. Like this, I really feel like the generational trauma, the ancestral trauma imprint piece of it, especially if your lineage did not reconcile or deal with that. It just makes sense, knowing what we know about water and us being water-based beings, that it is literally passed on to the waters of your body, since you are an amalgamation of, I believe, a unique soul that has its own energetic imprint coming into a physical being that is an amalgamation of the dad and what the dad is carrying, and then the mom and what the mom is carrying. And all three of those things come into the mix, and that is who you are. And you're in this dance, I won't say for better and for worse, you're just in this dance of your own unique energetic imprint, trying to deal and sort of maneuver with these physical imprints that are living in the waters of your being. And it's what's so cool about the soul likely being inextricably linked to the heart, and the heart being the seat of the soul. It just recontextualizes the importance of coming into heart-mind coherence, because I think that when you really tap into that, despite all of the traumatic things that were impressed upon the waters of your body, and then also the traumatic things that were impressed upon you in your physical life, I'm talking about ancestrally by those, your mom and dad, the waters of them coming together to create you, but also the things you're exposed in this life, is when you can come into heart-mind coherence, what you're doing is you are tapping into the true essence of your soul, and then that is reprogramming the waters of your body by living in that heart-mind coherent space. And I think it's just so cool thinking of the heart being the seat of the soul in that context. It recontextualizes why so many people who have drastically healed on a dime, or like Anita Marjani, when she had the near-death experience. I don't know if you know her story. She had stage 4 cancer, and then she had a near-death experience. And when she came back, she was in such a state of heart coherence that all the cancer was gone in her body immediately. Like she literally died because of the cancer, from, if my memory serves me correctly. But the point is that being in that heart coherent space just pushes all of the discord out of the waters of your body. And it's because you're connecting with the true essence of your soul, because the heart is the seat of the soul. I know that was very long-winded, but it's just like,
so beautiful.
Yeah,
everything you said, it is so true. Everything and anything can be healed. We just have to remember and know who you are. Like you said, that heart coherence. And it's, again, these imprints, like you were going back to something you were saying, but even like as an egg and a sperm from your father, you are consciousness. So even going back to, what did it feel like to be an egg in your mother's body? What did it feel like, or what thoughts was your father when you were created? And then to have this realization that you are this being from both of them. And I love when ideally mothers and fathers are doing this before they even conceive, so that you can consciously conceive and start calling that soul in. But you can do this, again, reclaiming your birth story before you have babies. You can do it while you're pregnant. This is kind of what me and my husband did, that my first baby guided us to, is reclaim both of our own birth stories, because both of our birth stories
are facilitating or passing down onto this birth.
Our new baby. And it can even be healed after your baby's born. You know, healing always, when we heal ourselves, we heal our generations back and forward. So I think a lot of people think, when we realize maybe we've harmed, I say this in quotations, harmed our baby because we didn't know better. But when you're bringing this to consciousness and you're healing, you are healing them too.
Well said. Since we're on the topic of all things like post-birth, I do want to talk about breastfeeding now too, because that's another topic that is incredibly important. I think a lot of people in the natural health space think that they know all there is to know about breastfeeding. So I'd love to just hear from your perspective, your just thoughts on that topic. Yeah.
You know, it's funny, when I was pregnant with my first baby, I was working as a dental hygienist, and I loved my job. And at the time I was pregnant, my husband actually had just lost his job. And I remember sitting in my car listening to a podcast, and it was talking about breastfeeding and how when you breastfeed your baby, in that moment is exactly what your baby needs. It's not just, you know, when you're breastfeeding your baby at night, there's like sleepy hormones that help them relax to sleep versus daytime. So they're like, it's cool, you can pump and you can put it in the freezer, but morning milk's going to be different than evening milk. And if your baby's going through some sort of conflict in their life, your body's going to produce something that's going to be exactly what they need. And I remember in that moment, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to quit my job. I have to quit my job because I have to breastfeed my baby and give them exactly what they need, because my baby has to have the best.
Wow.
So I just had this like striking moment, because I always intended on working. I didn't ever intend on being a stay-at-home mom ever. And again, at the time, my husband didn't even have a job. So when I came home and I was like, listen, I have to quit my job, and I feel really called to breastfeeding my baby on demand and giving him that. So you're going to have to figure it out. And he was like, okay.
That's
And
awesome. That's awesome.
I mean,
that
the
he was like,
conversation
all right.
wasn't as easy as that, but
I was going to say
mean,
that sounded super easy. Like, oh, okay.
No,
I got to figure it out.
But I just like had this like in my bones. I was like, I have to give that to my baby. So, and I realize not everyone has that opportunity to do that, I guess. And I will say I didn't even have that opportunity. I chose it, and we figured it out. And it wasn't easy to figure out, because I was the breadwinner actually of our family. And I love my husband so much for doing that for me too, saying, I know that's important to you, so I'm going to figure that out for you.
That's awesome. That's amazing.
So,
yeah. Have you seen the examples of like a mom who is breastfeeding two twins, and one twin is starting to, let's say, have a detox response? Like, I don't like calling it getting sick, but whatever, getting sick,
Healing
right? We know
response,
what it all means. Healing response. And the breast milk is a completely different color for that baby than it is for the other baby, showing that the breast milk is literally responding to exactly what the body needs. Most likely. That's why it looked completely different.
Yeah, literally our bodies are built so divinely. It's so crazy to think that we've outsourced all of these different things. Again, I'll say this 100 times. My baseline is, what did my ancient ancestors live like? We're creating binkies, we're creating bottles, we're creating this disconnection for our babies. And all I wanted was this connection with my babies, because I was born disconnected to my mom in a lot of different ways. So I was going to do everything that I could to create first that bonding. And then knowing that my body was so divine, it knew exactly what to give my baby in that moment, was just, I mean, it's incredible. And I still feel that imprint for both of my babies, knowing that I want them to decide when they're ready to be done, because then they're sitting in that sovereignty of, I chose. It was so important for me to have my baby choose how they were born, the moment they decided to come out, the moment they decided they wanted to release their placenta. These sovereignty imprints of like, I know who I am and I get to choose. That's so important to me.
I would love to see what your kids will be like when they're like 16, 18, especially as like teenagers though, when they're really stepping into the being defiant towards mom and dad phases of their life. Like, oh my goodness. Yeah, that'll be interesting. It's interesting though too, because there is such a stigma, especially again in Western countries, around extended breastfeeding. Like, and then you see a lot of situations where moms become so tired of it too, because there is an element of like, damn, I'm not sleeping. I'm tired of being woken up at night. I can think back to my son when just after he turned 2, he started doing this thing where it's almost like flirting, but obviously in a very harmless way. But he would, like, when he wanted milk, he would come up to my wife and be like, "Milky." Like, you know what I mean? Like trying to butter her up. Like, oh, please, I want milk right now, you know? But yeah, you're still breastfeeding your kids, and they're a little bit older.
Yeah, I've got he just turned 4 and another just turned 2. And I would say it's not easy. And there are lots of times where it's like, oh my gosh, this is really hard, because it really is trying to nourish myself enough that I can give. But a lot of times for me, it's reframing my mindset, thinking I'm so abundant, actually, that I'm receiving so much, that I have so much that I get to give. So in those moments of hard time, I have to like just reframe how abundant I am and how lucky I am to be able to do that. But mostly realizing that our babies, they consume, I mean, let me go back a little bit. When they're inside our belly, we know that everything we eat and everything we think they're feeling, our consciousness is passed through our breast milk to our babies. So that thought alone for me, everything I'm thinking, everything I'm feeling, everything that I actually get to intentionally think and pass on to them is pretty cool that I get to intentionally do that as I breastfeed. And being intentional and taking that moment is pretty cool that I feel like I see a consciousness in them. And I mean, I would attribute a lot of it to, I mean, I don't know any other way because that's all I do. But yeah, I definitely believe we're passing our consciousness to our babies through breastfeeding.
I mean, I completely agree. If you reflect back to, again, Veda Austin or Masaru Moto's work, it's pretty crystal clear that liquids are impressed upon by our thoughts, our feelings, et cetera, et cetera. And then your babies are taking on that information.
Yeah.
One question I do have with that is, like, as a mom who is breastfeeding too, like, you guys are traveling a lot. Sorry if I'm giving too much personal info on your lifestyle.
Go for it.
But I'd imagine that stress does come up. Like, that's a part of being a human being. So how do you reconcile that? I'm speaking specifically from a breastfeeding lens, knowing that this is passed to your kids, this information they are receiving as nourishment, when you are in situations of stress. Because I could see where a mom who's listening to this is like, well, damn, I got to be like very, very careful of not being in stress. And then they start on this like repetitive cycle of shaming themselves, or they're suppressing emotions that are there. Like, I need to just be happy all the time, which is faking
Impossible.
it. And that's,
yeah. No, it's doing your best and just taking a moment to be intentional. And it really is hard, I think, as a breastfeeding mom, for sure, to take those moments when you're in the middle of a project and you're like, I just want to finish that thing and I'm getting pulled away. But it is always like, I do my best to get myself right just because I have that knowledge. And I'm not perfect. I'm not going to ever say in any way that I'm not perfect in any form of my life, but knowing the knowledge that I do have is I'm always doing my best.
Yeah.
So
that's all
and
you
just
can
being
do.
intentional.
And that's helpful to hear. Like, people want to hear that. They don't want to hear, like, if you were to be like, that's on you. Sorry. Like, you're screwing your kid over.
No.
Yeah.
I'm certainly not perfect, but I do, like, there are specific things that I do try to do, like not texting or something while I'm breastfeeding, because I'm trying to be intentional about it. So it is just doing your best to be intentional instead of always disconnecting. Because if you're always disconnecting when you're breastfeeding, that's an imprint you're putting on,
disassociation.
Not like, yes.
Yeah, totally.
So you're not going to be perfect, but doing your best to be an intentional mother.
Are there times when you are literally like in a state of stress when you're
and my baby absolutely feels it. And my husband, luckily, he knows what I know, and he's very grounding for me. That he's
That's
like,
good.
listen, the reason he's freaking out because I'm like, why won't you just latch or whatever? And he's like, he's feeling you, and I'm like, oh yeah,
yeah. And then you just have to have grace and compassion for yourself. Feel the feelings that are present. Do you make a point to feel the feelings before you then try to latch? Like, okay, I need a moment. Pass them off to your husband.
Yeah, and even verbalize what I'm feeling so that I can like kind of put an emotion to it.
Yeah.
Let that move in a way.
Well, it's also to name it because, like, especially as your kids, Kylie and I have talked about this before. We actually talked about this on episode 150, where if we're feeling stressed out around our kids, we say that. We don't try to hide it and suppress it, because that's going to create a state of discord for them. We're like, I'm feeling that you're irritable, but I'm hearing words that reflect that you're not, and that's going to make it so they don't trust their own intuition and judgment. So it's just naming, like, hey, I feel really stressed out. It has nothing to do with you. Or if it did have something to do with you, I feel very frustrated that this happened. I'm working through it. It's my own thing to deal with. But just naming that so they know.
Yes.
And even if they aren't able to understand you, in air quotes, maybe they're younger at this point, they still understand you. So there's still a power in like verbalizing that and naming it.
1,000%. So that's what I feel has helped me for sure, is giving it a name, what I'm feeling. Even like I'm feeling overwhelmed, so that then I can take a minute and they recognize, just like you're saying, what we're doing is we're showing them that in that moment, they can say, I feel overwhelmed, and take a minute too. So I do my best.
Okay.
And luckily, I'm so grateful to have a partner that's always on board. He knows how important those things are to me, that he helps me. He helps me
Amazing.
A lot.
Yeah. There's something too about like extended breastfeeding that I think is so incredible. Obviously, like the nourishment piece of it, but also the bond with mom. And I could see where there are some people that say that you're creating like a codependent pattern with your kids. What do you say to people who say something like that?
Oh, I feel like because you very much have to have boundaries around breastfeeding too.
Yeah.
Because if I let my kids breastfeed any moment they wanted to, we'd be sitting there nursing all day, I feel like.
That's how it was with Kylie towards the end with our son. And that's kind of why she decided to go on a 4-day trip to break that. And it actually went really well. Like my son, it was so weird. She went to Mexico and it was just me and my son. And I was so worried that it was going to be hell on earth for me. And it wasn't. It was actually awesome. Like she left a few bottles of her breast milk and then went. But the reason I bring that up is because towards the end there, it was like that. It was like every 15, 20, 30 minutes. And it was like, okay, this is too much.
Well, what's interesting for sure is your babies know when you're kind of pulling away and then they'll want it more.
Yeah.
So creating those healthy boundaries too, it's not easy, but that's what I've had to do with my babies. And there always is this limbo. What's actually interesting is my 2-year-old. I just got to the point with my husband where I was like, you know what? I haven't had one full night of sleep for over 4 years because I breastfed my oldest, breastfed him all through the pregnancy and now tandem feeding. And I haven't had one full night of sleep. So I was like, maybe we can at least like cut out night times. So I was trying to, get up with him and try and love him and show him, there's other ways I can comfort you. If you're hungry, we can get you food. And he broke out in this rash all over his face.
So interesting.
Yes.
Wow.
So,
that's like perfect example of German new medicine.
Yes.
Separation conflict.
Yes.
Wild.
And it was so, yes. And it really was like, I saw it was painful for him. And as much as I was with my husband that I was like, no, we're setting this boundary, that realizing like, okay, he's not ready. Yeah. So why are we pushing this when he's really having a hard time? So we did go back to night feeds, but he's slowly now weaning himself. So
wow,
it
cool.
really is kind of interesting, just this, I don't know. Yeah, learning how to set boundaries with them. And one thing that I had to do with my oldest is we started this, timer kind of. Like the moment I start counting 10 to 0, then we're done. And it's really worked though, because when I start getting to be this is too much, and now I only feed my oldest one just before bed. Mm-hmm. So it's not like we're feeding
like
all the time.
All-day thing.
No. But yeah, it's like you slowly go and you start setting boundaries, and the more you do, they're with you because they're kind of making decisions with you. Mm-hmm. So yeah, but letting them decide as infants for sure. Breastfeeding on demand because I feel like that imprint too is really important because they're listening to their body when they need food. You're there to supply it,
of course.
But as they're getting older,
especially
a lot
if they can
is,
start receiving nourishment from other means, and that's sort of like the phase of naturally weaning.
For sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's tricky.
Yeah. What if nature's intelligence could directly influence your physiology, helping to regulate your nervous system, sharpen your intuition, and shift your emotional state in a measurable way? For over 25 years, Lotus Way has been pioneering the use of flower essences, liquid infusions that capture the bioenergetic imprint of plants. Unlike essential oils, these remedies work on a vibrational level, interacting with your body's meridians and electrical system to promote clarity, resilience, and balance. Katie Hess, who I featured on episode 74 of the Way Forward podcast, has spent decades studying the effects of over 300 rare and powerful flowers, hand collecting them from across the world. The result? A line of elixirs, mists, and anointing oils, and even some chocolate, designed to shift your state of mind and body, not through placebo, but through the subtle yet profound ways plant frequencies interact with human biology. I think flower essences are severely overlooked in the wellness space because it really is an incredible way to package up the wisdom and the innate intelligence of nature and deliver it to your body. And it brings your body back into coherence because it's tuning you on an energetic level like an instrument. So if you want to find which flower essences are right for you, you can take the flower quiz so you can see which ones match your current energetic state. As a listener of The Way Forward, you get an exclusive discount. Just use code ALEC10 for 10% off your first order. Or if you're the Way Forward member, get 20% off plus ongoing savings, and just reach out to us if you're a member and we'll get you your membership discount. Just go to lotusway.com/Alec or just head to the show notes so you can experience one of nature's most powerful energetic remedies today. you had mentioned before that you were planning on continuing to work, and then you had this realization that, okay, no, I got to breastfeed my babies. And that brings up another important topic that I want to cover with you too, is just like the whole postpartum space. And it's interesting because I think a lot of moms have the sort of innate tendency to really want to know, when can I get right back to doing what I was doing before after giving birth? And they're approaching it from this mindset of, okay, let's do whatever I can to get this phase over with so that I can get back to my normal life. And I'm not saying that they're selfishly approaching it that way necessarily. It's more of like a byproduct, you could say. But I think it all relates to just how we approach the whole postpartum space, which a lot of people refer to as the fourth trimester, because it really is like a fourth trimester. You're still within that energy, especially if you do a lotus birth.
Yeah.
But you're still like within that energy of birth. And fundamentally, your life has changed without question, like in either case. But I think our tendency to rush like back to work, to rush dad back to work, to put a bunch of people in her space, just the whole way we approach postpartum is messed up. I'd love to just hear your thoughts on the postpartum realm.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think it's hard because it's a societal thing where there is this whole idea of like bouncing back. So it's almost this competition of who can get back to life as fast as possible, when that's not even the point. And I feel like that's the hard part about us not honoring mothers for what they are, because we want so badly to go back to the maiden that just died, actually. In our own birth, we are experiencing, yes, the birth of our baby, but we experience just the death and rebirth of ourselves.
Right.
So when we're immediately not embracing that new version of ourselves and basking in that and being loved by the people around us, like we're the brand new baby too, like we're this new mother that just showed up. And that happens with every birth a woman has. There is this death and rebirth of herself. And that's kind of the whole part of the beauty of birth, is really going into the depths of yourself and that part of you dying to be reborn. But yeah, to have these people around us thinking we need to bounce back first and foremost, and people around us that aren't supportive of mothers because society doesn't. Thinking, because I remember originally my boss was like, well, you can have 6 weeks of...
You can have 6 weeks.
You can.
Yeah.
We had, because I worked at a small dental office, and he literally didn't have to give me 1 day if he didn't want to.
Yeah. Wow. That's wild.
The laws around that are like 50. If you have 50 employees, then you have to give like 8 weeks or something. But when there's less, you don't have to give anything.
That's insane. That's insane.
Yeah. So that's why I kind of took it into my own hands, where I was like, okay, well, I'm not coming back. I loved my old boss. I loved my job, but nothing was more profound to me than being a mother. And I never thought I would. I actually didn't even want to have kids.
Really?
No, I did not want to have kids. I thought people that brought babies into this world were like selfish, because why would you bring babies into this?
Were you like a more leftist oriented person at that time? Based on that sentiment, like it makes me think like,
If you knew me 10 years ago, I was nothing like I am now, but I had to have this kind of awakening for me.
I was a Bernie Sanders supporter in 2016, so okay. Yeah, we've all been there.
Yeah, but to think I was like going to lose this gift of what being a mother is, and trying to rush past what the gift is. The gift is, and even people trying to rush past birth, trying to numb themselves in birth. It's like, that actually is the gift.
Yeah.
So when we're trying to go back to this old life that actually doesn't even exist anymore, because we are new people and we're more refined, and instead of embracing that new and rediscovery of ourselves, I think women skip over this. Like, we are such massive creators. We just created this baby. And I kid you not, the moment after being postpartum, the creative ideas that come to us as mothers, if we could sit in that moment instead of being rushed back to work. Your
womb is literally a portal.
Yes.
It's a freaking portal, like actually a portal for life to come in. Like, that is wild if you think about it.
Yes. And women truly do meet their most powerful selves in birth. And so if we can sabotage that, that's truly what changes the world.
Yeah.
Is women rediscovering themselves, having these babies that are here to change the world as well, and like sitting in that. And if other people had the reverence and honor like they should go back to, I think that's a really sad part of society right now, is that a lot of the generation just above us, they had to go back to work, and their mentality around it is like, yeah, it's hard. We all did it. Sorry.
I know that it's like that boomer generation is very much like that.
Yeah. So honestly, for me, I cannot imagine a greater honor than my sons and their wives or future daughters that I have, to be able to be a witness and honor her in that time. And not just honor her, but this, father that just had a baby, because he's just been reborn as well.
Right.
I think that's something that we don't give enough honor around too, is the father. Is we think the father is now supposed to be, we've got these postpartum 40 days thinking suddenly he's supposed to be the one, but really he should be taken care of too.
Yeah. That's
he should be in bed with mom and baby bonding together.
It's a really good point. Yeah. And it's just a testament to how we are living in a way that is not in accordance with like tight-knit communities,
Yeah.
Because ideally it would be very easy. Like, oh, you just gave birth here. I will take your other two kids. What food do you need? And like, you guys just have your space for 40 days. You don't need to even think about working or anything like that. Have your space and we will take care of everything else and bring stuff to you.
Yes.
But we're not living like that anymore.
No, we're not. And then we wonder why postpartum depression is, so prevalent. And women are going back to soul-sucking jobs, being taken away from what they were born to do, is be a mother.
Yeah.
They just had a baby. Husbands are getting taken away, so now they're having to do it alone. It was never meant to be done alone. In that aspect, on top of this, a lot of women that have these traumatic births that then are suddenly alone.
Yep.
And that goes into, the way we were born. I do kind of want to touch on this topic of when we're born, having traumatic births, it is going to affect, maybe we're having a hard time breastfeeding because maybe we had an epidural. And I read this concept that is stuck with me so deeply that I've not been able to shake it, is this idea when we get an epidural, and again, I'm not shaming anyone that gets epidurals, just hear the concept, is we get an epidural, the body was meant to feel our baby leave. Okay. So when we're numbed from that sensation, baby comes out, our body actually believes that our baby died because it never felt the baby leave. So now we have this baby and our body thinks our baby died. So what kind of like mind trick does it do for you when your body and your mind aren't even in the same plane?
Wow.
So now your baby or your body's thinking, well, why would I make milk if I don't have a baby to feed? The baby died.
Wow.
So it kind of goes into this whole other concept of like, oh my gosh, our bodies are meant to feel this baby come out. It's expecting to feel a baby. When it doesn't feel what it's expecting, how does our body respond? And now we go through this depression like our baby died. Postpartum depression.
Wow. I've never thought about it like that. That makes a lot of sense though, too.
Yeah. But then, there's this spiral of now I'm struggling to breastfeed my baby. Now the hospital or whatever, they're telling me I need a supplement. And that's a whole other slew of,
it's just a perfect example of the second, third, fourth, fifth, et cetera, downstream effects that you don't even think about when it comes to man interfering with or playing God, thinking that he knows more than God's natural, innately intelligent, beautiful, brilliant way of doing things. Yeah. It's a perfect example. It's like, wow, look at the downstream effects of this. Like, my goodness.
Yeah. And then mom sits, and struggles because she wanted to breastfeed her baby. And now she's giving him formula. And now there's this conflict inside because she knows formula is not great for a baby. And then, the gut microbiome and the baby and all these different things. It's just this kind of spiral effect. And if they can sabotage that moment, like what cascade does that do?
Right. Exactly. I want to be clear because on what I just said, because I could see where it could be misconstrued. Well, earlier in the conversation, you guys were talking about being co-creators. The difference is being in a co-creative capacity in accordance with nature, trying to enhance that and reconnect with what God has created in God's design. Other people say source, creator, the one mind consciousness, it's all the same in my opinion. I like using the word God. There's some power behind the word God. And on the flip side of that, the other approach is, God's design is inherently flawed. I'm going to improve upon God's inherently flawed design. That is the co-creative, if you want to call it that, approach that I think is incredibly flawed and leads to incredibly damaging things. When you're taking the former approach, recognizing that I do have the ability to imaginate and think things into existence. I do have the ability to create. I'm going to do that as best as I can with my limited capacity to fully know at the breadth that God has the ability to know, to create things in accordance with what God's design. There's a completely different sentiment between those two.
Yes. And I love what you just said. And coming at the core of like where you're feeling it too. Is it coming from fear? Is it coming from love? Are you trying to create out of fear? Or are you trying to create out of love? Or are you trying to skip over something that you're fearful of? And that's the purpose of creating. Like you always have to go back to like your purpose too. And how you're creating, what you're ultimately creating. Because love is really, I can't imagine, nothing I've done out of fear has ever served me.
Nope. Maybe as a learning experience.
Yes,
but that's
yes,
it. Like,
yes, it has.
That's the only way.
But especially
like I was
when
thinking of my life, I'm like, yeah, probably not. The only way is like, I learn no longer to create from fear in that instance.
Yeah. But when we come from like a deeper why, because I do have a lot of mothers and fathers that come to me and they're like, well, I do want to have this baby out of the system, but they've got, all these fears. First, it's having these conversations with all of their fears first, and mostly realizing when you have those conversations that they're not real. They're not based in truth. They're based in maybe your lived experience, but is that really truth when it comes down to it?
Right.
We create these beliefs and now we create these scenarios that basically just mirror our belief.
Yep. 100%.
And we're creators. So we're creating that, environment.
Totally.
So really taking on that power of self-responsibility in every way of our lives is, I think, really the key to it all.
Yeah, totally agree. I have a few more concepts I want to touch on within postpartum.
Yeah.
I want to throw another thing at you that I have thought about a number of times. And I don't know if I've said it on this podcast. I have so many conversations elsewhere with so many people, I forget what I've said on air versus off air. But from my understanding, back in the day with our ancestors, women were so in sync with the moon cycles that their menstrual cycle was in sync with the moon cycles. And because of that, women typically were menstruating at the same time. And also because of that, they were oftentimes getting pregnant at the same time, which means they were having babies around the same time as each other, which means that their babies were growing up with kids their age to run around and play with, which also meant that in postpartum, moms that started experiencing postpartum depression and things like this had other moms around them to validate their experience that they could all share that space and energy with, and the village or the community would take care of all of them together.
Oh, beautiful. Can you imagine a world like that now?
Be epic.
Can we bring it back?
Yeah, that's what we're trying to do. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, I was just saying earlier to you how I didn't want to have babies first because I was like, what kind of scary world to bring babies into? And when I got pregnant, I had to release doomsday because I refused to believe in doomsday. I decided that I had to create a world that I want to raise my babies in. And that's exactly what I envision for my creation of my babies. And so that's why I show up for others. And I'm creating this whole new world. I feel like, I don't even want to say demand, but kind of creating even my postpartum plan on around that and having people that love and support me as part of my my community. Because my mom and my husband's mom showed up for both of us unbelievably. And there are going to be, people listening. I feel sad for people that don't have those kind of people in their lives. Manifest that person or manifest those people and envision being doted on and create that. Call that person into your life. People.
I think a lot of people approach, or a lot of women rather, I don't want to say birthing people. A lot of women understand the importance of creating a birth plan, But then there's the postpartum plan too,
Mm-hmm.
that I think a lot of women don't even consider.
No. Yeah. I think that is just what you said. We focus so much on the birth itself. And then after, it's like, now what?
Yeah.
And so many people in our communities do that too, because they're like, perfect, you had the baby, and they'll maybe drop off one meal or something, and then that's that.
Yep.
Really kind of creating in your mind, what does it feel like? What does it look like for me? And having those conversations with your community too. And seeing, for me and my husband, we didn't have any visitors until, well, really the first 2 weeks, really. The only people that were around were my mom, my mother-in-law.
Because you wanted them to be there
Yes,
for help.
yes.
There's a big difference, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And they weren't there holding my baby. They were there to support us.
Yeah. Bring you food, bring you whatever you needed.
Yes.
Yep.
Especially during that lotus birth time where we're not, because I know the imprints on people that touch my baby. That was a very sacred, your postpartum is such a sacred space, and creating that sanctuary.
Yeah, so you're not fearful of germs. You're fearful of like your energetic imprints.
Yes,
like,
that's exactly. I'm not scared of germs
such a
at all.
completely different flip now. It's
Yeah.
like, I don't know. I'm not scared of germs. Like, I'm not worried about that. I need your energy to stay over there.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And being so intentional of the people and slowly bringing specific people into our space.
Yeah.
And when people were dropping meals off, there was a very hard boundary too, where it's like, I appreciate you, the neighbors, to do a porch drop off instead of thinking that you're going to come in and visit and hold my baby. So it really is envisioning what that looks like, feels like, and having those conversations and creating it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Going there instead of just the birth, because it goes beyond. Because if you have this like amazing, incredible birth, and then at the very end, and no one's there to support you, because that's really when the mother becomes.
Yeah.
And she has to have that support to become who she is.
Totally.
So again, that's who changes the world, mothers and fathers. It's, yeah, I hold this vision so strongly for the whole world. So
you're carrying it well.
So I want to talk about one more thing related to birth, is when I decided to have my babies, I wanted to have a free birth. And I had this conversation with my husband. It freaked him out at first because he was like, well, okay, that means I have to be the midwife. Because he knows moms in birth are leaving. They're in another world, retrieving their baby. And
totally
it felt
true.
like I put the world on him when I had this conversation. He was really the one that wanted that support, which was fine. But having these conversations with him, making him realize that his job was never to be the midwife. His only job was to trust me. And if I felt so called to do that, we had these conversations on, I felt like if he couldn't trust me, what that would do to our relationship. And so ultimately he was like, okay, well, I trust you. And him realizing that his job was to be the shaman while I went on my psychedelic trip, he played his role so well and stood at the portal. And having this imprint where baby came out and he was the first to touch our baby, lock eyes, and then hand him to me, what kind of beautiful imprint that puts on this beautiful feminine, masculine energy, right? Because a mother, obviously, she's female, she's feminine, father is masculine. But in the moment where baby is emerging, it flips. Because mother is then giving and father is receiving, and that masculine feminine flips, and that puts this perfect imprint on baby.
Wow.
For him to be the one to receive baby and give back. So really, I feel like that strengthened our relationship tenfold with him just being the shaman and trusting me, and what that did to our relationship. I would say the majority of women that consult me are women that are being led by their babies. Because I think they're feeling, not always, but a very majority, they're feeling in their bones their babies guiding them to this path. And it's a lot of fathers that are fearful, rightfully so. But my husband and I, we do a lot of conversations. We do consultations together. And the amount of men hearing other men in this space is just so powerful, realizing their role in this. It's not just the women.
Right.
So, yeah. Anyway,
That's
I did want to touch on
like
that.
have these types of conversations, is because I very much am like in the know on the depth of this topic.
Yes.
Which is really cool.
So cool that you're stepping in and wanting to be the one that you're not being pulled. You know what I mean? Because there are a lot of people that mom wants to have a birth this way, but husband doesn't let her.
Totally. I know friends who've been there with that. It's wild. It's like, it's even wild when you think about that. And I don't mean this in a very like feminist sort of way, but that it's another example of the man trying to tell a woman what she can and cannot do with her own body, which is insane. Like, no, this is my birth. And I understand it's like, well, this is created by both of us, so I want what's best for the baby. And I understand the fears and insecurities around that as a dad who doesn't have the proper knowledge and hasn't heard a podcast like this or mine with Emily. But at the same time, you've got to trust that the mom is doing what she knows is best.
Yeah. And what's really interesting too is I don't think we put the weight on a father like we should. Because while the mother, she is physically creating this baby. She's growing this baby physically, but the consciousness comes from the father.
Interesting.
So I would argue that his role is almost as important or more important in the creation of this baby, in creation, and throughout the whole pregnancy and postpartum. So taking that responsibility as a father, and you are the creation of their consciousness, like how does that change the way we think and feel and act during this 9 months of gestation too, and postpartum?
Really good point. Really good point.
Yeah. We put a lot of stress on mothers, and I think moms take it on.
Yeah.
But if we could have more fathers that recognize their role, how that would shift as well.
Yeah. Agree. Totally agree.
Yeah.
Okay, the last question that I want to ask, just because I know my audience consists of, like I said, US, Australia, Canada, UK, all across the world, is with this approach that we talked about with the birth certificate, social security number, have you figured out an approach for other countries yet?
Not yet. I'm working with families right now in Canada, one in Australia, for their processes. And I haven't shared it yet until we go over the finish line. Right now, Canada's extra hard because, so in the United States, it gives you an option. Non-citizen, we haven't quite found that option or kind of loopholes in Canada, which maybe when Canada just becomes the 51st state, there's the loophole. Just kidding. But not yet. But I am working on it. I am also working with another family that were born, both mother and father were born in one of the 50 states, and they had their baby in Jamaica. So kind of getting their baby a passport by nationality through them, we're on the final stages of that. So I'm really excited because personally, I want to have my next baby abroad. I don't know where, but I know that was kind of one of those things where I'm like, I need to figure out this process for me having my baby abroad and to still figure this out. So my offerings are going to open very soon for all those people that are wanting to still get their baby passport that are having their babies abroad. So
awesome.
So soon.
From my understanding, what makes it complicated in other Commonwealth countries, let's say, so speaking to like the UK, Australia, Canada, is that the United States did have its own independent nation states at first with this fictitious corporate entity on top of it. Whereas in those countries, I'll speak to Canada and Australia. I don't know for sure if this applies in the UK. That's a lot more complex, but because it all goes back to the UK and banking. So that's a whole another conversation. But Canada only has the fictitious corporate government and then the land. And it's the same with Australia. So there is no intermediary where there was an original unionized nation states that were the original, I think back then, 36 states. You know what I mean? So like, because of that, it presents more opportunity to do things like this in the US than it does in other countries. It becomes quite complex.
Yes, definitely. I would say that. And that's exactly what I'm running into is there's easier ways for those born in the 50 states for sure. Exactly. Just because of that. So I hope to figure it out. I really do. And I'm on a mission to figure that out. But if there's anyone listening that wants to connect with me that does, I'd love to connect with you.
I'm sure there are. I bet there are people listening to this right now that already know in Australia. So yeah, please hit up Veda. And if you want to check out more of what she's offering, all the things related to the birth certificate, social security, the lotus birth package, everything else, all the things that you offer, all that will be in the show notes. So
Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you for being with me.
Thanks for having me here.